Good morning, everybody. I told you that I would do a lecture on listening and put it up. I didn't get to it yesterday, so I'm doing it. It's Tuesday morning. And of course, now that I'm recording, sorry, I'm about to sneeze. Go figure. Today, we're going to talk about listening. And one of the key parts of communication, when you think about it, you have all of these channels coming in. We've got to do something with them, right? So listening is really, if you think about it, half of communication. So we're going to look today at the process of listening and how well we do or do not listen. And that brings up a good question. Do we listen very well? And the answer is, surprisingly, we don't. We are not great listeners at all. Despite the fact that we listen a lot. And how much listening do we actually do? If you're talking about just from the time you get up to the time that you go to bed. So you're up, let's say you're up 16 hours. You listen actually a little more than half. We listen about 60% of our waking time. That's a lot of listening when you think about it. And there's a lot of information to take in when we're listening. And it's an extremely important component of communication because, like I said, it's half of you send out the message. Somebody's got to decode the message, find some meaning in it, and then usually respond back, right? But there is a difference between trying to get a message out of it and just taking input into our ears. So of that 60%, are we always listening? And even overall, in our full day, even when we're asleep, are we always listening? Well, we're listening about 60% of the time. We're hearing 100% of the time. And there's a big difference between hearing and listening. Hearing takes in everything that sound waves, auditory, if we think about it from that perspective. So from the time we're born, we start hearing, right? We don't know what it is, especially when we're first born. There's just all this input going into our ears. Hearing just involves picking up the sound waves that are coming. So it can be birds chirping, it can be cars driving by, it can be dogs barking, and it can be our mom and dad talking to us and all of that. And we can't really tell the difference. And even over time, once we learn how to differentiate between talking and, tapping on a wall, we sometimes confuse hearing with listening, and they're very, very different things. Listening is the process of receiving and responding to other people's messages. Hearing is just taking in auditory signal. And notice hearing is auditory signal, so it's sound signal. When we talk about listening is more than just, I just thought about the microphone being here. Listening is more than just auditory. If you think back to the models of communication, the interaction mode, you're getting the words coming at you, but you're also getting facial expression, eye contact, tone, pitch, inflection, gestures, body language. You're getting all of this stuff. Listening involves responding and receiving all of those channels too. So listening is not limited to just the ears. It's also the other senses and picking up all of the messages that we get. So when you had all these different channels coming at us, when we were talking about interactive model communication, we're listening to all those channels, which means we have to listen with more than just our ears. And it's a very important component of understanding listening, because it also sometimes means that because we're trying to listen on multiple channels, we also mess it up. And so it's actually part of why we don't listen so well. And that's brings up a good point about the difference between mindful listening and mindless listening. Mindful listening means conscious listening, active listening. You're trying to pay attention. You're trying to get a message out of whatever it is you're hearing. In mindless listening, it's just sort of noise in the background. If you think about it, if you're one of those people that studies with music playing in the background, the music in the background is kind of mindless listening. We're not really trying to listen to the words of the song or try to pick out meaning from that. It's just sort of background noise, or the fan running at night when we're sleeping. All of that is sort of mindless listening. We're not consciously working to get the message out. The problem is that a lot of times we mindlessly are listening when we should be mindfully listening. You know, we're trying to do 2 or 3 things at the same time. We're trying to watch TV and play a game at the same time. There's some mindless listening involved in that because we're not truly being present, listening to one particular message. So we're getting flooded with all of these things and we're just sort of ignoring a lot of it. That's more of mindless listening. We're looking for mindful listening, getting messages out of what we receive from the different communication channels. And it's a very important distinction, important enough that this talk does a nice demonstration of that.
Can looking at a computer screen make your ears stop working? This is a question I ask myself almost every day because I recently moved in with my boyfriend, Aidan, and I love living with him, but we've been arguing recently about the third party that we have in our relationship, his PlayStation. When Aidan plays the PlayStation, it's like the world around him disappears. He doesn't hear me calling him, he doesn't hear the doorbell. I'm slightly concerned I could be murdered in the house and he may not notice if he was playing the PlayStation. Now, I think he's choosing to ignore me. He says he honestly didn't hear anything. And so I ask myself, can looking at a computer screen make your ears stop working? Being a psychologist, I decided to take a look in Aidan's brain. And under normal circumstances, if I called Aidan's name, we would see something like this. So his ears would receive the sound of my voice, send a signal through his brain. This would make him consciously aware of me calling him, and he could answer me. So far, domestic bliss in our house. But now imagine he's playing the PlayStation and I call him. Watch what happens to his brain activity now. Not very much at all, really. The signal here is a fraction of what it was before. It's a little bit like turning your phone on silent. The phone is still ringing, but it's much harder for you to detect it. Aidan may be completely unaware that I've said anything because at a neural level, he's suffering from deafness. The computer screen really has made his ears stop working. So why does this happen? Well, we have a limited amount of attention and it works across all our senses. So in this case, the PlayStation is placing so much demand on his attention that he simply doesn't have the resources to process the sound of my voice. This is called inattentional deafness and it's completely involuntary. So, if looking at something can make you go deaf, is it possible that listening to something could make you go blind? This might seem mad, but this is something I looked at in my PhD, looking at driving behaviour. So I had drivers drive in a driving simulator while listening to AA Road Watch on the radio. And their job was to listen out, as many of you probably have, for traffic updates on the M50. And about halfway through the drive, I had really sneakily placed a huge 30-foot elephant on the footpath. And afterwards, I asked them had they seen it. And 90% of people listening to the radio failed to see this huge elephant. And again, this is because the radio task took up so much of their attention that they simply didn't have the resources to process what they were seeing, though they likely looked directly at the elephant for a number of seconds. They were blind, and they had no idea it had happened. This seems mad to us because we think that we see and hear everything that goes on around us. But if we live in a world where a PlayStation can make you deaf and a radio can make you blind, just ask yourself, what else might you have missed today? Thanks.
Well done, Ian.
I mean, that's crazy when you think about it, but it really makes sense. If we go back to perception, select, organize, interpret, if we're selecting the wrong thing, we can miss stuff. And that happened with people, missing the gorilla caught walking across the screen or the color changing on the curtain in the background. We are focused on one thing, and as a result of that, we miss another thing. If it happens with our vision, it can happen with our hearing. And so we have to remember to be mindfully listening. Sometimes we have to realize that the message is the most important thing. The person is the most important thing, and the message lies in the person. So we really need to listen fully to understand the message. And we don't always do that. So there's really 4 kinds of listening that we do. Now, we're not talking about hearing, we're talking about listening. And there's 4 basic kinds of listening that we do in the everyday lives. And we flip back and forth between all of these. One is task-oriented listening. So we need to listen in order to learn how to do something. If you're being trained on a new job, for example, how to do something, or we're walking through how to do an exercise in class, that would be task-oriented listening. So you're listening to learn a particular task. The next one is relational or empathic listening. We're listening simply to understand the relationship better, understand the person better, to understand how they feel. This one's really hard for some people because a lot of times when people are talking about, maybe they're having a problem in their life and they need somebody to talk to, so they start talking to them, and the other person feels the need to start saying, well, here's what I think you should do, blah, 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 blah. That's not empathic listening. Empathic listening means that you listen and you don't try to solve their problem. You just be someone they can listen to, you a shoulder more or less to cry on or talk to. And this one's a lot harder for us to do, especially some people. Mostly it's men that have the problem with this, because we do a lot of the next listening, men do. And as people, we do a lot of the next one. And so we listen to what somebody's saying and we start saying, okay, what we need to do is you need to do this. Not at all what we need. We need empathic listening. So you listen to understand, listen to feel what the other person is feeling. And then the next one is analytical. And this is where we spend a lot of time. We're analyzing a problem. We're trying to find a solution to it. We don't always need to find the solution to it. And the person that we're talking to doesn't always want us to find the solution. But in analytical listening, you're actually analyzing the parts, trying to say, okay, this is disjointed or this is disjointed, and trying to fix something. And then the 4th kind is critical. This is another one we don't do enough of. Critical listening means listening to see if there's really truth in it. Does it make sense? If you're listening to a persuasive argument or a commercial or something, you want to turn on your critical listening. People start throwing facts and figures and stuff at you, and you think, now, is that really true? Does that actually make sense? And a lot of times they don't. Later on, much later on, we'll talk about logical fallacies and how there are flaws a lot of times presented to us. And because we don't use critical listening, we miss it and we fall into traps and that kind of thing. Critical listening means, okay, and in a really silly sense, let's say we get one of those emails from, our distant cousin in Ethiopia, and there are a lawyer in Ethiopia, and he's writing to you, your distant cousin, Prince blah, 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 has died and named you the sole executor in his will. And as stupid as it sounds, some people do fall for that kind of thing. And it's because they're not using this critical element of listening. They're just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to get some money, blah, blah, blah. But critical listening means stopping and thinking for a minute, wait a minute. Do I have any relatives in Africa that I know of? And are any of them princes? Probably not in either case, right? And if I don't know them, that means they don't know me. So how would they leave me any money? critical listening, and that's a real simple example, but critical listening means you start listening to what's being presented and analyzing it. Do you believe it? Do you question it? How do you feel about it? What's your approach of it? What's your opinion? All of that kind of stuff. You start breaking down what you're listening to and analyzing it, being critical of what you hear. Now, we are not good listeners. We've already kind of established that. There's a lot of reasons for it where our minds get scattered. We've got all these channels coming in and maybe they don't agree, or maybe we select the wrong one to pay attention to. The question remains, how much do we retain? And what I usually do at this point is I'll write 4 numbers on the board in percentages of how much we retain when we're listening. And then I'll have the class vote on which one of the 4 they think it is, and then we'll narrow it down and re-vote. I'm going to bypass that because, of course, it's hard to do in this virtual format. But a lot of times I'll put the numbers I put up are usually 65%, 45%, 25%, and 15%. One of those is how much we retain from listening. And in reality, we only retain 25% of what we listen to. 25%, that's terrible. I mean, if you think about it, that means you will retain every 4th word of what you listen to in the course of a day. In the next day, like right now, you're listening to this lecture, you're only retaining every 4th word. And some of those words are and the, and I, and normal words. So we don't really retain a lot of the information, especially 24 hours later. Reading is even less. And if we only retain 25%, that's really bad. And why is that? How come we only retain 25%? We've been listening since we've been hearing since we were born. We discerned the difference between listening and hearing. We learned how to pick up messages. We spent our entire lives listening. You would think as you get to know something more and more and more. I mean, remember back in the video about the acorn, that guy talked about if you do something for a certain amount of hours, you would be a national expert at it, right? Well, we've all been listening for that amount of hours. Why do we retain so poorly? Well, there's a number of reasons for it. One is there's so much noise out there. And noise, we always think of noise being auditory, sound wave noise, which there's a lot of that out there. I mean, if you just stop and listen, even when we're having class, sometimes there's a lot of background noise. I'll have my computer on. If I'm in the house, even I've got the back door open so the cat and the dogs can go in the backyard, and you'll hear traffic go by and birds chirping, and sometimes my dogs bark, and all of that's noise, and it draws our attention away because remember, we get drawn by unexpected. Then also noise is things like maybe I'm hungry, maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after class, or I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for the weekend, or, oh my gosh, I got to cook dinner. What am I going to cook for dinner? All of that other stuff going through our minds while we're trying to listen to something is noise, and noise causes us to draw our attention away, and we will not retain everything that we hear. So there's tons of noise out there that we get every single day, because if remember, all these channels are coming in, visual channels, you've got auditory channels, even things like proxemics and how close together people are. We feel that kind of thing. You at some points get smell or olfactory signals, and our brains processing all of these things at the same time. And we do not, despite what everybody thinks, we do not multitask well. And so it causes us to only get slivers of all the channels that we're drawing in. So we don't retain everything. Noise is a big, big problem. And we're surrounded by more and more noise as time progresses. And people are always trying to grab our attention. Like TV late at night, the commercials come on, they're always louder. They're trying to draw your attention away from whatever you're doing. playing on the computer, the ads pop up and you'll see sometimes they put really flashy ads with bright colors and that kind of thing. That's because they know how selection organization and interpretation works, and they're trying to control that. So we get bombarded with all of this different kinds of noise every single day, every minute of every day. Then another factor that contributes to not retaining well is this simple number, 100 versus 600. Now, what this means is, on average, people talk at about 100, somewhere between 100 and 120, but we'll average on 100 words a minute. Not auctioneers, but just general everyday conversations run at about 100 words a minute. Our brains process somewhere between 600 and 700 words a minute. So you're listening to something, you're listening to me right now. I'm talking on average about 100 words a minute. Your brain can process 600 words a minute. So that means that if you want to pay a real good attention to me, you need to slow your brain down to 100 words a minute, right? So you just dial back the knob and pay attention at 100 words a minute, right? No one can do that. You can't slow your brain down. So while you're listening to me at 100 words a minute, you have 600 words a minute processing time. So 500 words a minute is sitting there not being entertained, not being utilized. It can't shut off. So it has to do something. So we start daydreaming, or in the back of our minds, we start thinking of other things, grocery lists and stuff I've got to do. And oh my God, this weekend, I got to do this. All of that goes on while we're trying to focus on this 100 words a minute. So we've got a brain that processes faster than we can talk. So we get racing thoughts. It's almost like this whole cloud of information is coming into our brains. And even though we focus here on listening, we can't do it that well, because at 500 words a minute, that's a big chunk of brain processing time that has to be filled in with something. And so we fill it in with something. If any of you ever try meditating, one of the ways you start meditating, you sit very still and you start counting your breaths, and you count inhale, exhale, 1, inhale, and you're supposed to focus solely on the air entering and leaving your lungs. And that's all you focus on. And when I was first learning to do it, we would do 10 breaths and then we'd start over and count 10 and start over and count 10. So it's in 1, 2. You're focusing on you feel the air entering your nose and filling your lungs and all of that. Your mind goes nuts with that. And if you've ever tried to meditate, the truth. You can't get to 10 before you're thinking of other things. And then you catch yourself like, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm supposed to be focusing on breath. And then you focus back on your breath. That's really how you learn how to meditate, is focus on the breath, it gets off, focus back on the breath, it gets off, focus back on the breath. Same problem, 500 words a minute. Actually, it's more than that in this case for meditation. But you've got this huge processing speed in your brain, and you're not utilizing a fraction of it. And so the rest of the brain's got to do something. And so it's going to cook up something else for it to do. And so you've got to learn how to focus on one thing at a time. And it's not something that we do naturally. And it's actually something that a lot of places will try to get us to do the opposite of. They want you to multitask, and they praise multitaskers and blah, blah, blah. But when we multitask, we don't do any of them that well. So that's another reason why we retain so little. Our brains are flying at the speed of light, so to speak. And our words are coming at us at a very slow pace compared to that. And the brain can't slow down. The brain can't shut off. You've got the same processing speed all the time. So it's got to do something. Another factor of that is information overload. We are bombarded with information. That's especially true as we progress through time, because 50 years ago, we were still bombarded with information, but we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the speed with which that we get information now. back then something happened on the other side of the world and you might find out about it in a couple of hours, or you'd see it on the evening news. Now if something happens on the other side of the world, you know about it within seconds if you've got social media on and notifications on. And so tons of information are coming at us all the time, and we actually become numb to a lot of it. You know, if any of you watch the news, they always open up the news every night, local news, national news, it doesn't matter. They always start with breaking news, and then it'll be Joe's cow got out this morning. You know, it won't be something that's super breaking news. They're saying it to try to get your attention. And when I was a kid, 50 years ago, when they came on and they said breaking news, it was big time. I can remember the first breaking news I can ever remember was President Kennedy had been assassinated. That was breaking news, and it didn't happen very often. When they said breaking news, you needed to drop stuff and pay attention. Now they say it every day just so you'll pay attention, and we'll become numb to that. And then they'll have ultra breaking news or extra breaking news or more important breaking. I mean, they'll come up with some other way to draw us in. So we become numb to the amount of information that we get over time. IBM, or was it Xerox? I always mess this up. One of those two. Maybe it was Xerox. Copying machines realized real early on that information overload was causing problems with productivity and efficiency in the workplace. People were just getting so much information in that they were becoming numb to anything that was important. They couldn't discern between what was important and what was not. And part of this was the electronic age, because, it used to be you'd go to work, you'd get off work, you'd come home, nobody bothered you. And then we got pagers. And I can remember having a pager. And if your pager went off when you got home, it had a phone number on it you were supposed to call. And technically you were on call for work, right? Now my pager would go off at 10 o'clock at night, and I'd have to call the number and there'd be a problem at work. And then over time, technology progresses and we get these things. This is my phone. And now they can send you email and call you and text you and, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I can actually remember getting email at 10 o'clock at night one night, and my boss had a presentation at 9 o'clock the next morning, and he needed me to build a spreadsheet for him, and he had waited until 10 o'clock the night before, and he expected me to have that done for him before the 9 o'clock meeting, because you have the ability now, you have the phone, you had a computer at home, you can do all this stuff, so you're accessible to me. Xerox realized that it was causing people to start really becoming numb to everything. And so they started encouraging turning stuff off when you weren't at work so that you didn't pay attention to work. And Ivy Tech does this to us. They'll tell us when you're not, in the evenings, of course, none of us do this, but in the evenings, on the weekends, step away from classes on the breaks, especially. They will tell us, like when we get done with summer semester at the end of July, they will tell us, take the next 2 weeks, do not look at your email, do not log into the system, blah, 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 blah. And they're serious enough about it that at Christmas, between Christmas break or fall semester end and spring semester open, they lock the building so the faculty and the staff can't get in. And so they realized that this was a problem. Xerox early on realized this. And so they started working to try to get their employees to understand to step away. And they created this sort of training video for their employees. You'll see a website pop up. It does not work anymore, so don't bother going to it. But they're intending it to be ridiculous, but it actually makes a good point with regards to how numb we become to a lot of this stuff.
There are things in this world that we'd rather not think about. But for some people, that's not even an option. Meet little Billy. Billy wasn't always like this. He used to be sharp, witty, like you and me. But then something happened. Billy joined the workforce.
And he's not alone. As we speak, business people everywhere are battling a mysterious psychoneurological condition. one that can only be described as disturbing.
Donna was Employee of the Month just last month. It now seems so long ago. 6 months after Sarah got her job, she started taking her smartphone into the bathroom with her. 6 months after that, she forgot where the bathroom was. They all suffer from IOS, Information Overload Syndrome. iOS affects millions of people across the country.
A normal human brain can retain enormous amounts of information. But a business person's brain is attacked by 281 exabytes of quote-unquote pertinent information every year.
Exabytes?
That's 18 zeros worth of emails, attachments, presentations, voicemails, thought starters, FYIs, and caveats. And it's growing, 30% a year. To make room for this new information, the brain is forced to delete all the old data it spent a lifetime compiling. So the very information meant to inform us is actually making us stupid. First, everyday sights and sounds begin to feel unfamiliar. Then muscle memory is affected.
Hey, Ed, how are you?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Finally, survival skills disappear. iOS is highly contagious. In a matter of days, entire companies can fall victim. Be forewarned, the following image may be unsettling.
Hey, Tom, come here.
You may be asking yourself, what can I do to help little Billy live a happier, more mentally balanced life? The answer is nothing. Billy is 5 years away from being vested in his retirement plan. He's not going anywhere. He'll be dumb as a box of rocks before you know it. But you can save yourself. Won't you please help yourself? Go to helpios.com and make this a better world for yourself. Billy would want it that way. We think.
This has been a public service announcement from Xerox. Xerox, bearing no legal responsibility for information.
So, as you can see, they realize the seriousness of information overload, and we are bombarded by, it's crazy the amount of information that we get bombarded with every single day. This clip does a good example of showing you just how much you get in emails and texts and social media and all this stuff. And we do need, for our own mind's sake, for the ability to get mindful listening, we need to start really paying attention, to the amount of information that we absorb.
It's called information overload, a theory that has recently been developed to address the intake of too much data due to the widespread use of digital devices, massive amounts of new information, and the ability to transmit this information so quickly. What's truly fascinating is that Americans spend half of their year consuming information. That's 182.5 days of straight data consummation. If I break it down, the average person consumes information for 12 hours a day, taking in 100,000 words a day, which is 201 letter-sized pages of text, single-spaced. The scariest part is that when only read, we remember 10% of this information. The stats on the internet seem decent, with the average person spending 32 hours online a month. During the same time, 30 billion new pieces of content are published on Facebook. That's 3 with 10 zeros. In terms of emails, the average professional receives at least 100 emails a day. No wonder why Yahoo's survey found that 1/3 of people would rather clean their toilets than sort through their inboxes. What's more interesting is that the average professional checks their inboxes 30 to 40 times an hour. The 21st century is clearly redefining multitasking. In a college lecture, students opened twice as many distracted windows on their laptops as productive windows. For every 100 productive windows, students also opened 27 email windows, 33 surfing and entertainment windows, 43 instant messaging windows, 87 operation system windows, and 19 miscellaneous windows. The question is, does multitasking work? Research states that 1 in every 40 people are able to multitask without performing worse at either task, which means a mere 2.5% of people are what they've coined supertaskers. So what does this mean for the rest of us? Our brain can process 100 trillion instructions per second, while our working memory can hold between 3 to 4 tasks at a time. Multitasking has been a large contributor to information overload, which in turn has been a large contributor to our country's deficit. It's estimated to have cost the U.S. economy $900 billion annually since 2008. $900 billion a year. I could go to space with Virgin Galactic 4,500,000 times with that money. So what does this all mean? Well, for starters, it means we've become digital junkies. But the real question is, how do we fix this? We need to learn how to limit ourselves. We need to turn off our cell phones, our laptops, our iPods, even if it's just for an hour. We need to read books. We need to embrace the time it takes to complete a singular task. We need to go outside and enjoy nature. Essentially, I think we need to unplug.
Now, that's pretty astounding when you think about it. Digital devices are here to stay, right? We're getting even more and more into it thanks to the pandemic. Now we deliver whole classes virtually. We're using it as best we can, but if we're not careful, it also causes all kinds of issues. So we have to find that balance in there somewhere, which was the point of understanding information overload. There is a balance, and in order to retain listening, one of the things we need to do is disconnect once in a while, sit down and breathe and listen to the birds and that kind of thing, and try not to take in so much information, because we are bombarded with an awful lot of emails and everything else that comes in on our everyday lives and our phones. And these phones, thankfully, because of this device right here, I can access all the information in the world. The other part that has caused us some issues because of that is we don't actually need to retain that much information anymore because we can always go look it up on our phones. And that's true until you don't have Wi-Fi or you can't connect into the cell service, or, something happens, the power goes out and you can't suddenly get to your source of information. And so then it would be nice to have been able to remember a lot more stuff than we do. And that's sort of the point, is it's causing us not to remember as much. And then as a result of that, it puts less and less of a value on really listening well, because we just think, we can look it up later. So you want to, not completely, but at least a little bit each day, disconnect from that and take some time to relax your ears, relax your mind, and get used to not taking anything in and give your brain a break. Because giving the brain a break will help it become stronger overall and retain more information. It's just like when you're exercising and you have to take a break from exercising once in a while to give the body time to recover. The brain needs the same thing. So information overload contributes to us only retaining 25% of what we listen to. Also, personal concerns. A lot of times when we're listening to somebody, and this is especially true when we're in a one-on-one conversation with somebody and we're trying theoretically to empathically listen, we feel like our internal concerns are more important than what the other person's saying. So while they're talking, we'll think about whatever it is we really are concerned about, And then we'll interject words periodically in there to make it seem like we're really paying attention and we're really listening. And the long run of that is we aren't really listening. We don't really retain. We don't really find out, what's going on with the other person. Empathic listening is down the toilet in that kind of a relationship, because we've decided our stuff is more important than their stuff. So we have to, again, actively think about, okay, I need to listen to this person, not focus on myself, focus on them, and consciously focus on them. So you're starting to see a trend about how do we make it better. There are a lot of what we call listening barriers. The book talks about a bunch of different ones. We're only going to look at 4, but there are a whole bunch more than these 4. But this will give you an idea of things that come into play that cause us not to listen very good at all. One is pseudo listening. So we pretend to be listening. This ties directly back into what I just said about personal concerns. We're acting like we're looking at the person periodically and we're going, yeah, but in our minds, we're thinking about whatever it is we really wanted to think about and trying to figure out, something on our own. And so we're putting our own ideas first and only on the outside shell appearing to listen when we're really not. Wayne's World did a really good job. You'll see this guy, he's pseudo listening. You can tell he's not really getting it. Of course, Garth figures it out, but this happens to us all the time.
All right, our special guest right now, Wayne Campbell, Garth Elgar, Wayne's World. All right, talking about Wayne Stock. Very exciting, big event. Everybody's excited, huh?
Yeah, it's going to be a big concert at Adlai Stevenson Park. It's just going to be a big party, We got some great bands coming.
Like Aerosmith?
I just want to remind everybody that there's still plenty of tickets left.
But that's no reason to wait till the last minute.
Because it's just a chance for the city of Aurora
to do something.
Fun. And to put the city on the map.
It's a lot of work.
Oh, well, work is hard.
You're not really listening to me, are you? I mean, I could say anything right now, like, you're a complete tool.
But you wouldn't hear it.
Granted, that's a little bit of an excessive example of it, but that is exactly what we do in pseudo listening. I've known tons of people, I see it, in classes, because people act like they're listening in classes. And my father-in-law used to do it to my mother-in-law a lot. In fact, he was probably a professional pseudo listener, because I can remember she was in the kitchen talking and he'd be sitting in this chair in the living room and she'd be talking away and he had his uh-huhs and yows and he had them perfectly timed to fit the conversation. And he's watching TV the whole time. And I was sitting on the couch one day watching him do this. And I leaned over and I said, "You're not listening to a word she's saying, are you?" And he went, "Nope." And I just cracked up because he had mastered pseudo listening. She had no idea that he wasn't paying any attention to her. But it's easy to see that when we're pseudo listening, we're not getting the message. We're not retaining. Even 25% would be a stretch when people are pseudo listening. So it's a definite barrier to listening and getting messages. Another one is stage hogging. So you are broadcasting your ideas constantly without listening to others in the conversation. So things like focusing only on what you want to say, or we see a lot of broadcasting on social media, especially Twitter. People love to put out their opinions. They don't really care what other people's opinions are at all. And this clip kind of shows stage hogging along with some other interesting views of listening barriers, but stage hogging is definitely pointed out here.
Speaking of tired, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and I'm really considering whether I should get something to eat. Like, maybe I should get a granola bar or something. It has the perfect amount of fats, carbs, and protein that you need in the morning. Or should I go with a Pop-Tart? Maybe I should go with a Pop-Tart. Or Pop-Tarts are or sugary sweetness, that's just good. I mean, it's better than caffeine for some people in the morning, so I don't really know.
Shelby, it's 7:50. We're calling you to class.
Oh, well, I guess I'll go with the granola bar then.
No, totally. Get the granola bar.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I really just don't even know what to do anymore. Like, there's so many assignments and essays and things that I need to get done, and like, my schedule is just crazy.
Yeah, it is so hard, and you like need a support system. Like I've been trying to work on 5 papers, all 100 pages long, and they're due in a couple of days, and I haven't started them. And so what am I need a support system, but who am I supposed to turn to? That's kind of, I know. Well, I mean, I haven't been able to see my poodle, and I mean, that's been really hard because she's been part of my life for so long, and what am I supposed to do with that relationship is almost ended because I never see her anymore. And, you know, and so it's really been hard. Where is I mean, I don't know. It was that kind of happened to me when I had something really traumatic happen this past week. So I like dropped my straightener on the ground, and when it hits the ground, it dents. And what am I supposed to do?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And where are your friends when you really need them?
When you need them.
Hey Shelby, do you want to go to Glue with me? I was gonna get it like fruit and granola. Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. Sure, I'll go to Gwyn, but fruit and granola. I'm gonna get like eggs, bacon, and hash browns. Why would I just get fruit and granola?
I mean, you can totally get that. Fruit and granola sounded good to me, so I was gonna get it.
Are you trying to say that like I'm eating too much at breakfast, or like I'm fat or something?
So many good examples there of listening barriers where you can obviously tell early on in that clip that one girl's not listening at all because she wanted to talk, but the other one is just stage hogging like crazy and everything's about her. And then where the 3 are sitting down, you see it again and only talking about what they want to talk about obviously causes all kinds of listening barriers, messages not to get through. And in the long run, it hurts the relationships. The other one is called insulated listening in the book, but we call it rebuttal tendency a lot. And it's when you are focused on what you want to say so much that that's what you're listening to in your mind while the other person's talking. So they're saying whatever they want to say. And in your mind, all you're focused on is your next thing to say. So you're actually sometimes literally thinking, hurry up and get done so I can say what I want to say. And while you're doing that, of course, you're not paying any attention to what the other person is saying at all. Big Bang Theory did a little skit on this in their show. And you're going to see Sheldon and Leonard are actually having 2 different conversations at the same time. Initially, neither is paying to the attention to the other one. All they're doing is focus on what they want to say next. And then Leonard comes up with a solution, he thinks, to fix that, where they're going to mindfully listen to each other, and it just collapses.
Play. 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 Play.
What are you doing?
Trying to use a Jedi mind trick to control Stephen Hawking. Play. Play. Ugh. He must be wearing a tinfoil hat or something.
I did a bad thing.
Does it affect me?
No.
Then suffer in silence. Play. 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 Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking.
Penny started taking a class. She wrote a paper. She didn't want me to read it. I went behind her back. I read it anyway.
Stephen Hawking hates me.
I don't know what to do. The paper's terrible. If I tell her, she'll know that I read it, and she'll get really mad.
I was beating him so bad he doesn't want to be friends anymore. Why does everyone love me except Stephen Hawking?
Is it possible we're having 2 different conversations?
How would I know? I'm not listening to you.
Hang on. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. Chess clock. We each get 5 minutes to talk about our problems. We'll take turns. Each turn will consist of a statement and a helpful response from the friend. Begin.
I humiliated Stephen Hawking in a game of words with friends. He stopped playing, and now we're not friends anymore.
He's probably busy. You're worried about nothing. Give it a couple more days. I'm sure he'll play, and you'll see that everything's fine. My turn. I can't let Penny hand in a bad paper, but how do I tell her it's bad without letting her know that I read it?
Beats me. Now, I know Hawking's not busy because I can see he's playing other people right now.
Maybe since you're so good, he's taking his time to meet the challenge. I want Penny to enjoy it.
Wallace told me he's a big baby. I didn't know that, and I played Extract for 82 points. Oh, it's all Amy's fault. She told me to play it. I've got to cut her loose.
Sheldon, I wasn't done talking. She hands in the paper tomorrow. I know I could help her, and she's my girlfriend. I should be allowed to help her. Why aren't I allowed to help her?
Yeah, I hear you, brother.
No. You need to give me some advice.
Fine. Women, huh?
No. Specific to my situation.
Blonde women, huh?
Empathetic.
It sucks to be you.
I quit.
Leonard, wait. No. I listen to your dumb thing. Leonard, come back. Leonard, come back. Leonard, come back.
What?
Oh, of course. It only works on the weak-minded.
Obviously, neither one of them is having any luck getting their message across. I love that Sheldon says he's a big baby while he's being a big baby. But you can see it's something that we all do, and we all focus on what we want to say next in conversations at times. No real messaging gets across. No real meaningful communication happens. And it can be, as you can see there, it could be a relationship killer. So we need to catch ourselves doing these kinds of things. Another one's selective listening, and we do this, especially as kids. Kids do this all the time. We only really listen to what we want to hear, or we only retain what we want to hear. So this little saying here is a good one. I got called pretty today. Well, actually, the full statement was, you're pretty annoying, but I only focus on the positive things. So it's something that we do a lot of. We will only listen to the parts that agree with what we're saying or agree with our ideas or, whatever we're trying to do, and we'll cut the other stuff out. Kids are masters at this because they sort of project the idea that they've got permission for something without actually doing the whole thing of whatever it is. But then you also see it a lot in politics and in business, and people will only focus on the parts that support what they want to say, or they're very, very picky about what you might say, I don't like chocolate cherries. And, oh my God, you don't like chocolate. There's something wrong with you. You don't like chocolate. See, they've selected it to fit their argument, and they took out other parts of what you said. Very bad for getting meaningful communication across, but it's one of those that we use all the time. And then, like I said, the book's got a ton more. Normally in class, we would do a couple of different listening tests. I've tried it in virtual classes before. It does not work at all. So we're going to bypass that. So how do we improve our listening? How do we get better? Well, this Chinese symbol is actually from your book, and I saw that and I thought, oh my God, this is so perfectly, it fits. How do we become better listening? We've got to listen with more than just our ears. We've got to listen with our ears, our eyes, and our heart. Empathic listening, caring for understanding, feeling, and we've got to try to give undivided attention. Now, I said try to give undivided attention because, of course, we can't always. It's hard to fill 500 words a minute worth of brain speed when you're listening to someone talk, but we need to be as mindful and active in listening as we can be. So Active listening, of course, involves responding to the speaker, asking questions, asking for clarification. We're going to see some good examples coming forward. But Julian Treasure here, this is a TED Talk on listening. He's actually written a couple of books about listening, and he talks about how we become better listeners. In this video, he presents 5 ways of becoming better listeners. In my workplace communication class, I actually have an assignment where my students have to take one of these 5 and practice it for 5 days and then write about, did they see a result, blah, blah, blah. So here are the 5 ways you can improve your listening.
We are losing our listening. We spend roughly 60% of our communication time listening, but we're not very good at it. We retain just 25% of what we hear. Now, not you, not this talk, but that is generally true. Let's define listening as making meaning from sound. It's a mental process, and it's a process of extraction. We use some pretty cool techniques to do this. One of them is pattern recognition. So in a cocktail party like this, if I say, David, Sarah, pay attention, some of you just sat up. We recognize patterns to distinguish noise from signal, and especially our name. Differencing is another technique we use. If I left this pink noise on for more than a couple of minutes, you would literally cease to hear it. We listen to differences, we discount sounds that remain the same. And then there is a whole range of filters. These filters take us from all sound down to what we pay attention to. Most people are entirely unconscious of these filters, but they actually create our reality in a way because they tell us what we're paying attention to right now. I'll give you one example of that. Intention is very important in sound, in listening. When I married my wife, I promised her that I would listen to her every day as if for the first time. Now that's something I fall short of on a daily basis. But it's a great intention to have in a relationship. But that's not all. Sound places us in space and in time. If you close your eyes right now in this room, you're aware of the size of the room from the reverberation and the bouncing of the sound off the surfaces. And you're aware of how many people are around you because of the micro noises you're receiving. And sound places us in time as well, because sound always has time embedded in it. In fact, I would suggest that our listening is the main way that we experience the flow of time from past to future. So, sonority is time and meaning, a great quote. I said at the beginning, we're losing our listening. Why did I say that? Well, there are a lot of reasons for this. First of all, we invented ways of recording. First, writing, then audio recording, and now video recording as well. The premium on accurate and careful listening has simply disappeared. Secondly, the world is now so noisy, with this cacophony going on visually and auditorily, it's just hard to listen. It's tiring to listen. Many people take refuge in headphones, but they turn big public spaces like this, shared soundscapes, into millions of tiny little personal sound bubbles. In this scenario, nobody's listening to anybody. We're becoming impatient. We don't want oratory anymore, we want sound bites. And the art of conversation is being replaced, dangerously, I think, by personal broadcasting. I don't know how much listening there is in this conversation, which is sadly very common, especially in the UK. We're becoming desensitized. Our media have to scream at us with these kind of headlines in order to get our attention. And that means it's harder for us to pay attention to the quiet, the subtle, the understated. This is a serious problem that we're losing our listening. This is not trivial, because listening is our access to understanding. Conscious listening always creates understanding, and only without conscious listening can these things happen. A world where we don't listen to each other at all is a very scary place indeed. So I'd like to share with you 5 simple exercises, tools you can take away with you to improve your own conscious listening. Would you like that? Good. The first one is silence. Just 3 minutes a day of silence is a wonderful exercise to reset your ears and to recalibrate so that you can hear the quiet again. If you can't get absolute silence, go for quiet. That's absolutely fine. Second, I call this the mixer. So even if you're in a noisy environment like this, and we all spend a lot of time in places like this, listen in the coffee bar to how many channels of sound can I hear? How many individual channels in that mix am I listening to? You can do it in a beautiful place as well, like a lake. How many birds am I hearing? Where are they? Where are those ripples? It's a great exercise for improving the quality of your listening. Third, this exercise I call savoring, and this is a beautiful exercise. It's about enjoying mundane sounds. This, for example, is my tumble dryer. It's a waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I love it. Or just try this one on for size. Wow. So mundane sounds can be really interesting if you pay attention. I call that the hidden choir. It's around us all the time. The next exercise is probably the most important of all of these. If you just take one thing away, this is listening positions. The idea that you can move your listening position to what's appropriate to what you're listening to. This is playing with those filters. You remember I gave you those filters at the beginning? It's starting to play with them as levers, to get conscious about them and to move to different places. These are just some of the listening positions or scales of listening positions that you can use. There are many. Have fun with that. It's very exciting. And finally, an acronym. You can use this in listening, in communication. If you're in any one of those roles, and I think that probably is everybody who's listening to this talk. The acronym is RASA, which is the Sanskrit word for juice or essence. And rasa stands for receive, which means pay attention to the person, appreciate, making little noises like, oh, okay. Summarize, the word so is very important in communication, and ask questions afterwards. Now, sound is my passion, it's my life. I wrote a whole book about it, so I live to listen. That's too much to ask for most people. But I believe that every human being needs to listen consciously in order to live fully. Connected in space and in time to the physical world around us, connected in understanding to each other, not to mention spiritually connected, because every spiritual path I know of has listening and contemplation at its heart. That's why we need to teach listening in our schools as a skill. Why is it not taught? It's crazy. And if we can teach listening in our schools, we can take our listening off that slippery slope to that dangerous, scary world that I talked about and move it to a place where everybody is consciously listening all the time, or at least capable of doing it. Now, I don't know how to do that, but this is TED. And I think the TED community is capable of anything. So I invite you to connect with me, connect with each other, take this mission out, and let's get listening taught in schools and transform the world in one generation to a conscious listening world, a world of connection, a world of understanding, and a world of peace. Thank you for listening to me today.
So he's got 5 good ways to become more active in listening. And like I said, I have this an assignment for workplace communication. And most of them will pick the 3 minutes of silence, but some of them pick some of the other ones, picking out different parts of sound. And it's amazing. They all think it's going to be, ineffective for them. And almost 100% of the time it's, wow, this actually really helped. I think I might continue doing it. So it does help improve our active listening and paying attention to what actually is being said. He also brings up a good point. We don't teach listening in schools, and we really should, because it is a vital part of school. It's a vital part of learning how to do better, learning how to understand, making our relationships better, and figuring out, okay, what do we need to do here? What do we need to do there? If you really care about somebody, you spend the time understanding how they feel. This is that empathic listening coming into play, and making sure that we really understand what they mean and not try to step in and fix their problem when that's not at all what they're talking about. So one of the last things I wanted to do, the book talks about different levels of listening. So there's the silently listening level, and then they're starting to become more actively involved. That is a good pathway to understanding listening and also understanding how involved we need to get into listening. But we're running a little bit long on time, so I'm not going to get into that today, but be sure to cover that part in your book. It's covered in the tests. And then also remember that listening involves not just what somebody says and not all of the channels that are coming back at you, because you're paying attention to facial expressions and all the nonverbals. That also listening involves sometimes what's not said. So this is, again, being an active listener, paying attention to what is being conveyed to you, because a lot of times people will tell us stuff and the real message is in what they don't tell us. So only by being active can you pick on those particular kinds of cues and catch what actually is being said or what actually the true meaning is. And Simon Sinek talks a little bit about listening as well. Simon Sinek, if you've never paid attention to him on YouTube, has got some really good ideas and talks about communication as a whole and how we get along, particularly in relation to business. And they're all fairly short. They're in the 5 to 10 minute range. And this is talking about the art of listening and really trying to master being good listeners.
So listening is not the act of hearing the words spoken. It is the art of understanding the meaning behind those words. When people say you're not listening to me and we simply parrot back the words that they were said, congratulations, your ears work. That is the act of listening. But the art of listening is creating an environment in which the other person feels heard. Now you notice what I said there. The other person, and I used an emotional word, feels, right? I don't want to know that you heard the words. I want to feel heard. I want to feel seen. I want to feel understood. And that is a learnable, practicable skill. So there are many parts of it. It's things like replacing judgment with curiosity, right? That's a hard thing to do. We're a pretty judgy group, right? To be curious why someone has a point of view. It's creating a safe space for someone to, as my friend Dia Khan calls it, empty the bucket. So even if we find what they're saying just reprehensible, right? You're never going to be able to actually have dialogue until at least one of the parties gets the opportunity to say everything without judgment. And as she calls it, emptying the bucket. And once somebody feels like they've completely said everything, then they're more apt to listen to you. But usually what we do is we defend, or we litigate, or we interrupt. We point out flaws in logic, which is just frustrating. And when you point out some flaws in somebody's logic, because we're all imperfect when we speak, and we all choose the wrong words at various times. And that's not what I meant. You know what I meant, is what we have to say. Well, if you know what you meant, then why don't you say what you can see how this spirals. But it's things like when somebody says something, and there's really easy ways to do it. Things like, go on, tell me more. What else? And they keep talking. And you go quiet, they feel the space. And tell me more. Go on. And eventually, it's all out. And then there's a safe space for you to respond and express yourself in a constructive way. But that's correct. We do not teach listening, and listening is the way to create to build trust with someone. You make someone feel heard, they'll trust you. It is the way to find common ground in opposition. In simple cases in business, but in more complicated cases in national politics or in global politics or in war. Why do William Ury, who wrote Getting to Yes, he talks about the same thing. He goes, we have talk shows, but we don't have listen shows. He says we have peace talks, but what we really need is peace listens. And he, who's been at the table at the highest levels of peace negotiations, he said people show up and start demanding what they want, and that's how the negotiations begin. Nobody starts by saying, so tell me why you came here. There's a great documentary that I recommend to learn this. It's called White Right, Meeting the Enemy by Dia Khan. In a nutshell, Dia is a Muslim woman living in the UK who was trolled by white supremacists to the point where the police got involved because her life was at risk. They told her stay away from open windows. That's how bad it got. The way Dia responded was by moving to the United States and going to meet the white supremacists. And she brought her cameras. I mean, you can see it all happen in this documentary. And basically, she gave them a safe space to feel heard. Now, that sounds mad. Like, why should she give them a safe space to feel heard? They should give her a safe space. Yeah, fine, good. Like, it's never going to happen. Dia sits down with these white supremacists and she gives them a safe space to feel heard. It's extreme listening. And I say it's extreme because, I mean, they hate her, They don't just disagree with her. They want her off the planet. And she lets them empty their bucket, as she calls it. And then conversation begins. And because they feel heard, they start to trust her. And as they start to trust her, she becomes a friend. And then it creates this paradox where I'm supposed to hate this woman, but I trust her and consider her a friend. And what you see is one by one, these white supremacists, these diehard white supremacists, start dropping out of the movement because they can no longer reconcile their beliefs with reality. And if it can happen in this extreme environment, then it can happen anywhere. And all that is required for us to cross political divides or disagreements at work and things like that is one of the parties has to learn how to listen. It doesn't even require both parties to learn the skill. That's the amazing thing. And it is one of the most remarkable skills that anyone can learn, the power of listening, yeah. So the documentary is a great extreme example of what it can do.
So you see how important listening actually is. It's a skill we do not focus on, do not teach. And it's a critical part of interpersonal communication. So that's it for today on listening. I do recommend going in and reading in the book about the levels of listening because that's also very important. And then we will get together tomorrow and start looking at another critical part of communication, and that is the nonverbal side. I'll see you later.